Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the second installment of the 5-part webinar series, Stating Your Case, Using Communications to Enhance Knowledge and Increase Gifts. Today's webinar is co-presented by Ed Karen, Consulting Vice President, and Marcy Tweet, Consulting Associate. Ed joined GG+A in 2011 as Consulting Vice President, bringing to the firm his experience in strategic planning, public policy, partnership development, and strategic communications. Prior to joining GG+A, Ed served Providence College for 20 years as Vice President, College Relations and Planning, where he held cabinet-level responsibilities for strategic planning, public affairs, and strategic communications. Ed's co-presenter, Marcy Tweet, joined GG+A last year after previously serving as Events and Public Relations Manager with Pillsbury United Communities and Pillsbury House Theater, a nonprofit serving inner-city Minneapolis neighborhoods. Marcy brings to GG+A a wide array of experience in small development shops and corporate sponsorship, individual donors, and integrated marketing and communications. Today, our presenters welcome any questions you have during the session and will answer those questions in the time remaining at the end of the hour. To address the question to Ed and Marcy, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen, select all participants from the drop-down menu, and send us your questions. Any questions we do not answer today will be addressed in a follow-up email that we will send next week, along with a recording of the session and the presentation slides. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and I now will turn it over to Marcy to get us started.
Thanks, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have another phenomenal turnout at today's webinar, which is the second in our Getting Big Results series. I, too, want to encourage all of you to submit questions online as we go along today, which we'll answer at the end of our presentation, and if we don't answer them, we will send out that follow-up email that Catherine talked about. Before we get started on communications today, I want to be sure you're all aware of our schedule for the next 3 webinars in this special series that we're presenting every 3 weeks between now and April 12th. GG+A has been so privileged to work with some of the most successful fundraising nonprofit organizations in the world, and we really see this series of 5 as the opportunity to provide our best practices that we've gained over 50 years to a wide array of nonprofit organizations. We're calling this series Getting Big Results in Small Development Shops, and while it's geared at small shops, it's absolutely appropriate for fundraisers and nonprofits of all sizes, which I know we have represented on our call today. You can log on to our site now to view the first webinar on strategic planning if you were unable to attend, and I definitely encourage you to visit our website after today's session to register for the remainder of these 5 sessions, which are all a part of the free series GG+A offers this spring. As Catherine mentioned earlier, I'm happy to be joined by my colleague Ed Karen, who has 30 years of experience in effective fundraising communications and is a great partner for this webinar today. Both Ed and I know that from the smallest nonprofit organization to the largest institutions in the world, communications can be a thing that either sets them apart as outstanding or sometimes can significantly damage fundraise results. So we want to make sure that your organizations have the best communications in place to make sure your fundraising is top-notch. Today, Ed and I will cover a number of topics: communications planning, avoiding common mistakes, building a case for support, and finally introducing you to a fantastic toolbox that you can utilize starting today in your organization. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to my partner Ed Karen to help kick us off with some information about effective communications planning.
Welcome all. It's a privilege for me to join you today for this webinar session. It really wasn't that long ago that I served as an in-house practitioner myself, sitting in your chair dealing with many of the same challenges and opportunities that you have to address each day. So hopefully I'll bring that same perspective to today's presentation. We have a fair amount of ground to cover, so I'll move along at a good pace, mindful that we want time at the end of the hour to address some of your questions. So let's begin with communications planning. This traditional planning tool often gets a bad rap as a theoretical exercise in which a lot of time and energy gets expended for the end product that simply sits on a shelf. I would argue to the contrary, that it should be a living, breathing document that drives all of your communications. A well-thought-out plan may require some heavy lifting of you up front, but it can pay big dividends as an effective roadmap to guide both the strategic and the operational aspects of your work. Let's review this chart in front of you. A plan's value may differ a bit depending on whether you are in or outside a campaign mode. So for example, in campaign mode, a good plan would articulate how you align your campaign goals with your organization's strategic priorities, which really is an essential prerequisite before you even attempt to align your campaign and communication goals. If you're outside the campaign mode, it still articulates how best to align your communication goals with your strategic vision and the direction, which is still a critical first step in how you do planning. I would argue this is an area often overlooked even by some very sophisticated organizations who sometimes underestimate the value of the relationship between strategic planning and communications planning. A well-thought-out plan also offers a very disciplined approach, how you would define your positioning and messaging in the campaign mode, or in the alternative, shaping brand strategy outside the campaign. I'll come back to this topic a little bit later. However, one universal value I'd argue that a plan offers, regardless of which mode it's in, it will help you answer a very fundamental question: why your organization should be a donor's top philanthropic priority, particularly in a giving environment like this that has never been more fiercely competitive. As I said previously, if move to the next slide, please, an effective communication plan involves both strategic and operational elements. On the strategic side, I'd make the argument that there are at least 5 elements that should be included in the plan. 1, assess the communications environment you have, both externally and internally. 2, the word alignment again. It's not good enough just to align your communication goals with that of fundraising, but also to align the audience subgroups or segmentation with targeted communications you feel would be the most effective for that particular subgroup. 4th, make sure your plan has strategies that fully integrate and repurpose your communications. And finally, and most importantly, you really need to think about fully developing a message platform. Again, I'll come to that in a second. On the operations side, take a fresh inventory of all your communication assets. You may be very surprised to see the depth and breadth of what you have available in your arsenal of communications in order to accomplish your messaging. For example, there may be a very low-profile affinity group e-news that you're using that for a particular messaging could be very effective, perhaps even more so than a high-profile magazine or collateral piece or even a suite of some of your digital tools. Secondly, look at your communication tools and tactics, again by audience segment, very important aspect of your planning. Thirdly, discipline yourself to develop a task timeline to execute these tools and tactics. And a good plan will also help you allocate the resources you're going to need, both people and dollars, in order to define these tasks that support your various tools and tactics and to assess what the financial investment's going to be. And finally, again, I'll say this several times, do not forget to develop outcome metrics to help you define and to know what success is going to look like. Now let's move to messaging platform. For me, it's the heart and soul of any plan. For many of our clients, they would argue that it is the most important component in developing a comprehensive communications plan. Inspiring a positioning architecture doesn't happen without a very disciplined approach. So we here at GGA have developed a construct that helps us work through a very disciplined approach that begins using a very sequential thought process to answer 5 key questions. Responses to each of these questions build upon the previous response that ends up producing the message end product. So let me quickly take you through the construct. Element number 1, descriptors. What are the words or phrases that your organization uses to describe itself? And just as importantly, what are the perceptions that it projects to your key audiences? Element number 2, define your organization. Sounds simple, but try to do it in 1 or 2 paragraphs in a very distilled, synthesized way to define who you are as an organization. Element 3, your vision. What is your organization? Where is your organization headed? And what is the exciting vision for the future that's going to inspire donors? Element number 4, why does your organization need philanthropic support? How do we define the aspirations that we hope philanthropy is going to support? And most importantly, if your fundraising is successful, how will your organization change the neighborhood, your community, the region, and perhaps even how will it change the country or the world in which you live? In other words, how impactful will your efforts become as a result of their philanthropic support to you? Element 5 in this construct, your fundraising priorities. Hopefully, those priorities go beyond infrastructure needs. And do they include some newly developed initiatives that combine enhanced competencies with a new enterprise that will change that part of the world that we described in element number 4? And finally, element number 6, the positioning statement itself. This is the tough part. It's a synthesis of all the aforementioned elements distilled into 3 or 4 paragraphs that hopefully answer 2 very important questions. Why should I give? And secondly, why should your organization be at the top of my philanthropic priority list? Beyond inspiring a position architecture, I think there's some other characteristics that I would recommend you include in an effective communications plan. So I'm going to go over 3 or 4 of these. First off, the sense of urgency. Take full advantage of the opportunity to convey the concept that this is your moment. If you've done your job at the front end of the plan, you've already connected the fundraising needs with initiatives that are critical to achieving your strategic priorities. Secondly, capitalize on your new outreach initiatives. If you've got something that's been very effective, you've developed some energy and enthusiasm for some of your constituencies, and you should use that energy and enthusiasm to communicate your messaging to a very receptive audience. Thirdly, don't forget the performance metrics. It will help you define your success both quantitatively and qualitatively. And lastly, don't forget to address potential communication gaps that you may have with your audiences. And I've cited here a couple of examples. Number 1, do you have a feedback loop that will help you assess how your supporters, what their level of understanding is for the gifts that are being used? Some of your supporters may give you a gift because you've asked for it. Others may give you a larger gift if you've been very specific in your messaging that conveys an opportunity for giving that really fits in very well with their life opportunities and priorities. Second example is make sure you assess your alumni satisfaction or understanding of the full range of opportunities available to them to either become or stay engaged with your organization. Oftentimes, you may think you're communicating sufficiently, but they're not aware of the full range of opportunities, particularly some of your younger volunteers or alumni who really do want to participate at this stage of their career. So for me, these are the components that should shape your plan. Again, for me, an effective communications planning is a roadmap and should not simply be an exercise that you do because your superior is demanding it or for you to check it off because you want to get it off your to-do list. With that, I'm going to ask Marcy to introduce our next topic, which is avoiding common pitfalls.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to hear you describe the communications planning tools, and having worked in multiple nonprofits in my career, I know how helpful this would have been when I was in those nonprofits, and I hope that it's helpful to all of our listeners today. And I think it'll inform us as we go on to this avoiding common pitfalls section. I know we've all had that moment when you get an e-newsletter or a mailed piece from another organization and you think, oh no, this is terrible. We're very quick to point out common mistakes made in other people's communications. We see them and we're quick to tell people what they're doing wrong, but we sometimes forget to do our best to avoid them ourselves. So in this section of the webinar today, Ed and I will go over some of the common pitfalls of what you can do to avoid these in your organizations. I know Ed has some great examples, so I'll let him kick us off on this section.
Thanks, Marcy. I'm just going to hit on a few that I think are often repeated. Again, I'm going to go back to alignment. It's worth repeating. It's not enough for you to align your fundraising and communication goals because it's the wrong starting point. The alignment needs to start with making sure through your strategic planning process that you've aligned those strategic priorities with your fundraising goals as a critical prerequisite before you address alignment of fundraising and communications. Can't emphasize it enough. It's one of the most common understated challenges we face when we're dealing with client activity. Secondly, audiences. It's not enough to identify who your external and internal constituencies are. You really ought to take full advantage of segmenting by what I call potential impact, the deployment of communication tools, and what % of effort you will have to invest in those segmented audiences. I'll show you a chart later on in the toolbox section that will graphically demonstrate what I'm talking about here. Thirdly, positioning. Not enough to simply do a good job of articulating your brand identity, particularly if you're in a campaign mode. You really need to go through that disciplined positioning construct that helps evolve the messaging to answer very convincingly, why should I give? Two others, and then I'll turn it over to Marcy on core messaging. Some people get all caught up that you really do need very slick sloganeering in order to come up with your messaging. High recall messaging does not have to be slogans. It could simply be expressions that organize in a very compelling way the giving arguments that you have thoughtfully work through in your planning, communications planning activity. You don't need a lot of these messages. In fact, sometimes if it's more than 4 or 5 that's repeated through your various communication tools, you risk confusing your donors or prospects. And you don't have to repeat verbatim in each communication vehicle. Repeating with supporting point variations in different formats can be very effective, whether it's text or illustrations, graphs, anecdote profiles, and many others to keep messaging very fresh. Communication tools digitally. Your website obviously is important, but it's only one element in your digital toolbox. You really do need to think about a fully integrated suite of social media and interactive media tools that should not be underestimated. And by the way, don't underestimate the importance of your internal communications. The work organization you have is your prime ambassador to convey what it is you are trying to communicate to your key audiences. If they're attending a social gathering and they're well informed, they will make thoughtful answers to questions among the people in their social circle, which then helps you as essentially another way of cultivating your key audiences, whether you're in campaign mode or not. With that, I'm going to let Marcy hit on some of these other communication pitfalls that we also find fairly common. Marcy?
Thanks, Ed. I'm just going to touch on a few more things that we find really common mistakes that are made. First off, mistakes are easily made in your solicitation materials. Too often we consider our donors one-size-fits-all, but it's simply not true. Your $100 donor and your $100,000 donor simply can't be solicited in the same way with the same messaging across the board. Customizable donor kits are what we recommend for our clients and are really the way to go when it comes to pulling together a more tailored ask. I worked with a small nonprofit organization a number of years ago whose focus was always to produce the glossiest, most highly designed and expensive printed reports we possibly could. The executive director there thought that the more expensive the print piece looked, the better she was going to get when it came to donors. But the problem wasn't in the printing, it was in the messaging. Printing large upfront orders of these kinds of glossy print pieces might at the time seem like a cost-saving tool, but at the end of the day, it's putting every donor you have into a box that's often too small to fit a lot of them. Second on this slide, and this I see all the time, is choosing hype over substance. If you're going to talk about dollars, you also have to connect a donor to what those dollars do and what effect and impact they're having on the community around you. If you're going to talk about the ways your organization is transforming the landscape in your area of service, that's terrific. But donors will want to see clear evidence of what you're doing, how it's working, and where you're really making change. Conversely, we oftentimes see people who are being too tactical. What you're doing today is really important to donors, but they also want to see that those tactics on a daily basis are leading to a clear, overarching mission and a strategy that they can invest in. Hype is good. We want your donors to get excited about you and feel that hype, but they also have to be able to see the nitty-gritty details in your communications about what they're investing in. Finally, this last pitfall is a great transition for our next section of this webinar. Many organizations hit these common pitfalls in developing a case for support. All stories, no vision. All mission, no vision. All graphics and no clear messaging and call to action. These are all things we see in our work every day, mistakes that we see that we help clients get above. Your case for support should balance excitement about what you do with a clear path for how you do it. So with that, I'm going to move on and talk to you a little bit more about building a case for support for your organization and your fundraising program. Of course, the most important question here is, what is a case for support? Sometimes this is associated specifically with higher education or organizations who regularly engage in campaigns. But we need to also apply it to all nonprofit organizations, from the smallest to mid-size and large organizations, and make sure that we know that the case for support has to be applied across all sectors. In today's philanthropic environment, every organization should have a clear, compelling, and easily accessible case for support to help your donors make the best choice as they're investing in nonprofit organizations and hopefully choosing to invest in yours. So what is it? It's your position in the philanthropic landscape. Who are you? Where are you going? What are your goals for the future? An incredibly important part of this is the third sub-bullet here. Why are we important? Really ask yourself what effect you're having on your community. As Ed said earlier, not just neighborhood and not just city, but state and national and even internationally. How are you making an impact on those important issues? And finally, why are you important to your donors? This is an important question, and I want to point out it's a different question than why you're important to your community. They're not the same answers. The reason you're important to an individual donor might be a different answer than why you're important to the world or to the United States. So moving on, why does a case matter? Why should you have it, and what does it do for you? It gets you on the same page as your donors and gives them a clear proposition of value in your fundraising efforts. The first bullet here is phenomenally important. Just because someone knows your organization well, even if they have a deep connection to your organization, it doesn't mean they have to give you money. It's just not that easy. That person, the one who believes in you, the one who wants you to succeed and has been involved, still has to be shown why an investment in your organization is a good one. This proposition should appeal not just to their heart and not just to their head, but simultaneously to both with clear priorities. You want them to walk away from the case statement. I think this is really important, our fourth bullet, saying there's something here for me. You want them to say, yeah, I can get on board with that. And finally, a case statement matters because it positions your priorities today. We've all had donors who've been with us for 20, 30, 40 years sometimes, and often they have a clear picture in their head of what their money should do for you. They may not even be aware of the new ways to invest in your organization. The case statement can guide your discussion with those donors on current priorities and reasons they're so critical to what you're doing today. Another important question to answer here is how will you use a case statement into your day-to-day activities? Of course, it will help you translate needs into opportunities, connecting those needs in your organization with the priorities you have in fundraising. It will bring together your staff and key internal stakeholders around a clear set of priorities and create some distinguishing language that can begin to be a place to meet and ensure that you'll all have the same kind of elevator speech when you're talking about what you do and how you do it. You can use this case as well to strategically test your philanthropic proposition. Get your donors together. This is really a best practice that GG&A recommends to all of our clients, and our clients do this every day. They host leadership briefings, which are small gatherings of donors, where you can hear priorities. You can hear them say what sort of floats to the surface in the case statement, and they can provide their feedback. Also, we encourage all of our clients to think about confidential one-on-one interviews with donors that will help to determine real issues with the document from your most important stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, the case statement is a great building block to an elevator speech. Let it be your script with potential donors and with current stakeholders. Also, if your large case statement can help you, but you need a more detailed document for smaller projects, let this be the document that frames your mini cases, things like annual fund appeals. It doesn't need to be this larger case statement, doesn't need to be the end-all, be-all of your process. It can guide your smaller case statements as well. And again, Ed talked a little about this too. Let it help you to drive your internal communications and collaboration so that you're arming your non-fundraising staff with the tools they need to talk openly and educated in a way that they know what they're talking about at things like industry events and things like that. So moving to the next chart here, you'll see a clear map of what a good case statement looks like. We go back to these 5 important questions all the time. Who are we? Where are we going? Why are we important? What is needed? And why does it matter to our donors? And we'll give you an example in this chart of the things you should do with each of these questions. So when you're answering the question, who are we, you need to talk about your organization's distinctive difference. What makes you different than your competitors in the market? When you're talking about where you're going, outline your strategic direction, your goals, and your plan. A great resource for this is the webinar we did a few weeks ago, looking at strategic fundraising in general. So I'd encourage you, if you weren't on that call, to look back at that on our website. Third, if you're answering the question, why are you important, reference the organization's specific projects, why you're important in your community, the larger issues that you're developing. What does it take to realize your goals? Think about, in your case statement, outlining the steps you're taking to deliver on the strategic plan you've hopefully already created. And then finally, and often most important, why does it matter to donors? Talk about the relevance in each individual's life. And again, use the segmenting that Ed talked about earlier here. Why are you relevant to donors of a certain segment, of a certain income level, of a certain age level, people who want to be involved with you? Why do you matter to each of those different segments? When you follow this map to create your case statement, you'll develop something that accomplishes even greater goals than your fundraising efforts. So some of those goals that a good case statement might accomplish we'll cover in the next few slides. Because as much as we all like really nice looking case statements and collateral materials, it's not just a piece of paper. It's something that can really actually strengthen your whole organization and not just your fundraising efforts. Because your organization gains power when donors clearly understand your importance and your place in their philanthropic priorities. Also, as I said earlier, it's really important that your case statement positions you in a larger setting, your city, your state, globally, nationally. What are you doing that makes you a leader in your field? The last bullet here is something we haven't touched on yet, but it is critically important to this process. A good case statement is true. Everything you have to say in that case statement needs to be supported by facts. Think about a donor reading this and reading something and saying, where's the facts behind this? What are the numbers behind this? They're going to ask, is this true? So across the board, connect your claims to facts so that you're making sure to support every opportunity for a donor to invest with the reasons factually they should get behind you. More on what a good case statement accomplishes: it inspires. And we use that word really intentionally. We don't want to convince your donors to give. We want to inspire them to invest in you. This goes back to that earlier statement of there's something here for me. When you're using the right emotional language and telling stories in a way that shows your impact, connecting that with graphics and other supporting materials, a case statement should be inspiring. It should make your donors want to invest right then and there. And then finally, and probably most importantly in a case statement, give them a call to action. Let them know how they can invest right then and there. What do you want this person to do right now? Ask for the gift and be willing to put it out there to give them that opportunity. So there you have it. That's your case statement. Combined with Ed's amazing communications plan and a knockout case statement, you'll have donors lined up at the door, right? Well, maybe, but you also need the tools to make that happen. So I'm going to turn this back over to Ed to talk to you a little bit about our sample communications toolbox.
Thanks, Marcy. Well done on the case statement. In trying to think this through, it was important, I think, to leave you with some concrete reference materials that you could look at your leisure to see whether or not it would be helpful. So I've come up with my set of 5 different toolbox vehicles, some of which or all of which may already be part of your own toolbox, but I thought it would be worth touching on each of these and hopefully adding to what is already your wide array of reference materials. First and foremost, a sample communications plan outline. We talked about it at the front end of the presentation. A couple of misunderstandings about communication plans. Some people think that if they're not phone book size documents, that they're not covering the entire landscape. I would argue that there are 7 very distinct components along with supporting elements that make up a really solid communications plan. So I've listed them here. Each one of the bulleted items is what I call a major communications plan component with the supporting elements underneath